Will we see a deal between the two leaders? And is it going to be a substantial deal? Is it going to be actually China giving concessions, or will it be smoke and mirrors?
I think we will see a deal. Both sides are hungry for a deal, but I don't think it's going to address the structural issues that are really at the heart of the conflict. We're worried about China's involvement, the government's involvement in state-owned enterprises and industrial policy. Those will not be resolved in a 150-page trade agreement.
Okay, are you talking about Huawei? And if you are, can we actually even build 5G without Huawei? So are Western democracies just going to bury that worry?
Huawei is definitely involved in the discussions, but I think the trade agreement will try to set that aside and say that's something we're going to track in a different way. Instead, they're going to try to address issues like currency manipulation, state-owned enterprises, and industrial subsidies. But again, those are deep structural issues at the heart of how China's economy works. We cannot resolve them in a 150-page agreement. Even if we see a signing in March, it won't be the end of the road.
Alberto, where do you see this going?
We see it as a framework. So imagine for emerging markets, sometimes you have IMF programs monitoring fiscal performance and debt. So in this case, the US-China agreement will monitor trade policy and compliance with intellectual property regulation. So there will be periodic assessments of how China is doing based on certain metrics about intellectual property, about trade, about importing more US goods. And the aim in economic terms is to create an incentive for cooperation in the medium term. So it's not the end of the game.
Stephanie, I don't buy it for a minute. I don't mean Alberto Gallo or what you're saying, but what we witnessed in Hanoi is front and center and stark. We're going to have the two leaders of China and the United States, who knows where, let's say down at Mar-a-Lago poolside over 2 scoops of vanilla ice cream, and they have to decide to change things. After what we witnessed in Hanoi, are we going to have another Hanoi in, let's say, Mar-a-Lago?
I don't think so, Tom. I think that Hanoi is actually going to make it more likely that we see an agreement in Mar-a-Lago. Trump is hungry for a deal. He wants to have a tweetable delivery. He wants this, but there's also economic incentives, right? The farmers are getting hurt. The steel industry is doing okay, but there's still 10% tariffs on $200 billion worth of Chinese goods.
Okay, but what about the Chinese? What do they want over 2 scoops of ice cream?
The Chinese exports have gone off a cliff. We've seen a massive decline in Chinese exports. Xi has a huge incentive to bring a deal. There's a big political conference happening next week, the People's National Congress. So he's also under pressure to bring home a deal. Will it be a deep deal? Will it resolve the fundamental conflicts? No. But we will see a deal because both sides are hungry for an agreement.
If we have a deal, does it move renminbi or does it move dollar?
Well, it's going to move Chinese shares. There's also a positive trend of including Chinese shares in portfolios. It's going to move emerging markets. The China stimulus we're going to see this month is going to be a little bit more domestic, though, so less of a benefit for industrial countries, metal exporters to China. It's going to be more about consumption and China developing capital markets to import capital, to allow consumers and banks to lever up and fund spending and consumption in the future. So they're becoming a little bit more like the US. They want to become a consumer-based, more consumer-based economy and less an industrial economy.
Stephanie, if there is a deal, is actually currency going to be part of that deal?
I think we're unlikely to see currency be part of the deal. The U.S. has said you're not going to manipulate your currency. If you do, we're going to use tariffs to sanction you. That's hard for China to agree to. I think it's a difficult political issue. And even if it is part of the deal, the big question is how do you enforce it? How do you actually enforce any rules on currency in a bilateral agreement where the U.S. gets to be judge and jury and say, oh, you're breaking the rules, we're going to sanction you with tariffs. So the enforcement question is the really big question, not whether or not it's in the agreement.